I still remember that morning, down to every sound. The old swivel chair creaked each time I moved, as if it were complaining on my behalf. 6 years at the Chicago Traffic Engineering Bureau. Same chair, same coffee stain, shaped like the state of Texas on the armrest. 17 years as a safety engineer, and I had never seen a place so talented at maintaining stagnation. I once stuck a post-it over that stain that read, "Don't bother cleaning. This is office heritage." At CTB, heritage meant things that were never replaced, people included. The coffee machine in the hallway still carried a sign that said, "Under maintenance." It had been hanging there since 2019. Every quarter, someone wiped the dust off it, like performing a ritual to worship the old. I used to joke that that sign has seen more quarters than my retirement account. That morning, Harold Pike, my direct supervisor, called me into his office. His voice always had that peculiar tone, half warm, half spreadsheet. "Marianne, have a seat," he said, gesturing to a brand new chair in front of his desk. I sat down. His chair didn't squeak. He slid a folder toward me and smiled that calculatedly sympathetic smile. "Budget's tight this year, Marianne. I really wanted to approve your 10% raise, but maybe next quarter will look better." I nodded, keeping my professional smile in place. Inside, I thought, he says it like a prayer, not a promise. I had heard that same line 3 times already, just in different seasons. Once in spring, when the budget wasn't finalized, once in the summer, while waiting for the adjustment report, and once in the fall, preparing for the new fiscal year. The seasons changed. The promise didn't. I never met this mythical next quarter that everyone kept talking about. I didn't ask who got a raise. I already knew. Ryan Mercer, the deputy director's son. 2 years of experience, 3 report errors, and a smile powerful enough to soften an inspection notice. He had just shown off his new watch the day before. "A little reward for exceeding expectations," Ryan said. I told him, "You should set it to beep whenever the budget gets tight. It'll match my heartbeat." Harold didn't hear that. Lucky for both of us. When I stepped out of the office, I stopped in the hallway. On the gray wall by the director's door hung a polished metal plaque that read, "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one's watching." I stared at it longer than usual. Maybe because I was starting to wonder, if no one's watching, does anyone still care to do what's right? Back at my desk, I opened my email. A message congratulating Ryan Mercer for his outstanding contributions in optimizing the inspection process. I was the one who had written that process. Ryan had optimized it by skipping several safety checks and calling it agile innovation. Perfect, I thought. Here, innovation means being reckless with protection. I smiled, the kind of smile I call a survival reflex. In this office, smiling is a survival skill, especially for women. Smile so they don't call you difficult. Smile to dodge those half-truth pep talks like you just need to be more proactive. Smile when your boss says, "We really value you," right after slashing your bonus. Yes, I'm good at smiling. Smiling and still submitting reports on time. That noon, I ate a cold sandwich and drank instant coffee. A coworker stopped by. "Not going out for lunch?" I said. "Why? At least my chair knows me here." We both laughed, but neither of us found it funny. Harold walked by the engineering floor, patted my shoulder. "Hang in there, Marianne. I know you deserve more, but we just have to wait for the right timing." I smiled. "I'm waiting too. Not sure what for, though." He left. I noticed a small wrinkle on the back of his shirt. Tiny detail, but to me, it was a crack in the armor he thought was flawless. Men like Harold always believe they're right until someone looks close enough to see the crooked seam. By day's end, Ryan went around handing out donuts. "Celebrating the raise," he said. "Come on, Marianne, have one. They're sweet." I took one, looked straight at him. "I prefer sour, keeps you awake." Ryan laughed, the clueless kind of laugh. I didn't bother explaining. 6:30 in the evening. The office was thinning out, the fluorescent lights flickering in exhaustion. The sunset outside painted the rows of desks in grayish gold, the same lifeless hue you see in hospital waiting rooms. Quiet, clean, soulless. My chair creaked again as I stood up. I shut down the computer, slipped the documents into my bag, and glanced one last time at the metal plaque on the wall. It reflected my shape, blurred and distorted. I didn't know then that months later, that very plaque would be taken down quietly when everything blew up. But that morning, it still stood there, a steel-plated joke. I walked down the hallway. Light rain drizzled outside. Traffic lights reflected red over puddles, like tired veins of the city. I pulled my coat tight, wondering why I was still there. Maybe because I needed the money. Maybe because I once believed that doing good work meant someone would notice. Or maybe because I forgot that my worth wasn't printed on a paycheck. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first day of the chain of events that would bring the entire bureau to its knees, begging me to come back. And if you're still listening by now, where are you watching from? At your workplace, does the coffee machine actually work? If it does, congratulations. You're living in the luxury class. As for me, I had a squeaky chair and a broken promise. But sometimes it's the smallest sounds that warn of the biggest quakes. This story isn't just about a raise, it's about value and what happens when one person finally realizes their own. I got home just before 8 in the evening. My small apartment sat on the third floor in a worn building whose elevator only worked when it wanted to. Tonight, it did not want to. I carried my bag up the stairs, listening to the fluorescent lights in the hallway flicker, the familiar sound of something trying to work while on the verge of breaking. The door opened to the smell of soap and oatmeal. My mother, Lucille, sat in the living room, holding the TV remote she still believed was a phone. The evening news showed a train derailed somewhere on the East Coast. She looked at me with a slightly lost look, then smiled as if she had run into an old friend. "You're home, little Lucille," I answered gently, like always. "Yes, Mother, I am here." Lucille used to be a nurse, the kind of woman the whole block relied on when trouble came. Now she forgets her lunch, but still remembers how to make tea for someone else. Alzheimer's is a quiet thief. It does not take everything at once. It peels away memory in layers, leaving gaps that make a person get lost in their own house. I set my bag down and kissed her forehead. "Did you bring the apple pie I like?" "Yes," I said, and lied. I had forgotten to buy it. I did not want to say that the money left in my wallet was enough only for needs, not wants. My son, Evan, sat at the corner table doing homework. He is 14, skinny, wears glasses, and asks questions that make adults think twice before answering. "Mom," he said without taking his eyes off his math book, "you keep the train safe, right?" "Right. Then who keeps you safe?" I stopped, not sure whether to laugh or cry. A simple question that held both innocence and a hard truth. I answered, keeping my voice light. "People say stability is priceless, but nobody asks who has to pay the price for that stability, kiddo." Evan looked up and frowned. I smoothed his hair. "Eat. There is vegetable soup and some bread. Not great, but enough." We ate in silence. My mother mumbled about someone named George, a neighbor who died 10 years ago, then asked what day it was. I said, "Tuesday, Mother." She smiled. "Oh, then we will make bean soup tomorrow." She says that every night. After dinner, I did the dishes. The sound of running water drowned out the TV. I glanced out the window. The rain kept falling, tiny beads like the city sweating. Far off, a train passed and the steel wheels shrieked, then faded into the night. My job is to make sure those sounds, the grinding of steel, do not become screams. Ironically, while I keep other people safe, I feel myself drifting toward danger, debt, burnout, and invisibility. After I put my mother to bed, I opened my laptop. Evan calls it my work addiction. I call it survival. In the dark, the blue light washed my tired face. I reopened the signal system I was not supposed to touch during the day, the alert management software for the rail line, not out of curiosity, but instinct. I used to joke with colleagues that if that system had a soul, it would text me whenever something was off. Tonight, the soul was screaming. An anomalous string of data appeared, alerts marked, resolved with no handling notes. For most people, those are just numbers. For me, it was a crack in the cliff. Someone had manually deleted logs. That meant incidents had been covered up. I checked again and again. Not a system error, not a glitch, a human hand. I sat very still, my hand tight on the mouse. Faces of passengers I had met during inspections crowded my mind. Old people with grocery bags, kids pressed to train windows. I pictured what would happen if a wrong signal let a train miss its stop. I shut the screen and leaned back. My heart raced, but my head felt strangely cold. This was no longer about raises or being overlooked. This was about lives. I looked toward my mother's room. The door was slightly ajar. The nightlight threw a thin strip of glow. I heard her murmuring in her sleep, a small voice saying, "Do not let them do it wrong, girl." The words caught in my throat. I did not know whether she spoke to someone or to a memory, but I understood that I had been given a task without anyone ordering it. I opened my notebook and wrote down what I had seen, not to report yet, to remember. My pen shook across the page as I copied each data line, every signal code, every timestamp. Outside, a train sounded far away. Steady, trustworthy, unwitting. Evan came out, yawning. "You still awake?" "Not yet," I told him. "Go to sleep. You have school tomorrow. I can hear the trains. They are loud." "They are fine," I said. "They are on the right track." I said it and then fell quiet. Part of me did not know whether I was talking about the trains or my life. When Evan closed the door, I checked the clock. It read at 1:37 in the morning. I saved all the data and named the file Note 1 because they will not listen. Before I turned off the light, I stood at the window and looked down at the street. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the pale yellow lights. Chicago lay quiet, but quiet is not peace. It is the pause before something detonates. I whispered to myself, a small promise. Tomorrow, if they still do not listen, I will make them listen. I arrived earlier than usual the next morning. Not out of diligence, but out of unease, that engineer's instinct when data doesn't line up. Even a single line out of place hums in your head like the faint screech of metal somewhere deep inside a spinning gear. I turned on my computer and pulled up the file Note 1. The traces were still there, alerts marked resolved within 2 minutes. No notes, no confirmation. I stared at them, and the feeling came back. This wasn't a glitch, it was intent. The morning meeting room smelled of burnt coffee, and the clock ticked like a slow metronome. I stood beside Harold and showed him the screen. "These logs were manually overwritten," I said. "Someone deleted the alerts without any engineer confirmation." "You knew about this, didn't you?" Harold looked at me over his glasses with that familiar administrative smile. "Marianne," he said slowly, "we don't need perfection. We need progress. You know how it is. Cost, time, pressure. Everything needs a bit of flexibility." "Flexibility," I repeated. "You're talking about the subway safety system, Harold, not folding a sandwich." He shrugged, his tone softer, but his eyes still hard. "We have to pick our battles. This system has been running for 40 years, Marianne. Don't let a few log lines make you lose sight of the bigger picture." I pressed my lips together. Progress toward what is making headlines. No one spoke. The clock ticked, each sound sharp and patient. I looked at him and saw the thing I feared most, exhaustion disguised as reason. I left the room. In the hallway, Ryan was laughing with coworkers, holding a new certificate. Process optimization, 20% faster average inspection time, the headline read. Everyone clapped. Ryan spotted me and raised the paper. "See, that's teamwork getting recognized." I smiled lightly. "Congratulations. I guess safety only needs speed now." He didn't get it. Of course, he didn't. At lunch, I met Sally in the cafeteria. She was the only person in the building who could talk to me honestly without fear of being recorded in a memo. Working in finance, she heard more than she wanted. She slid closer, lowering her voice. "They're cutting again, Marianne, and they think you'll stay quiet and cover it." I looked at her. "Cutting what we have, nothing left to cut. Inspection hours, staff, and some data. I don't know the details yet, but there's a strange internal transfer between engineering and the software vendor." I exhaled slowly. "You think this is random?" Sally shook her head. "Random doesn't happen twice in the same spreadsheet. Someone's cleaning the path for the quarterly report. When the numbers look good, everyone gets a bonus. When something breaks, only one person takes the blame." I said for her. Sally didn't answer. Her eyes said enough. It was a look of quiet dread, half pity for me, half for herself. She knew that people who still cared about ethics never lasted long in a system addicted to numbers, and clean reports. That afternoon, I went back to my desk. No one looked at me, yet I felt eyes flicker from a distance. I opened the inspection dashboard and traced the data backward. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Not one log, but 12. Not one line, but 3. Alerts marked as handled, with no staff confirmation, no signatures, and no repair proof. One of them was from the North Line, the one carrying more than 180,000 passengers every day. I didn't shout. I didn't send an email. I just opened a new file and started writing down each number, each timestamp, each missing ID. No drama, no witnesses, only data and time. I knew I had crossed a dangerous line. They would audit access logs. Sally had warned me. But if I stayed silent, I would become part of the very deceit I despised. I used to think I was good with numbers. Turns out the hardest thing isn't reading data, it's reading people. Numbers don't lie. People do. I remembered what my mother said last night, half awake, half dreaming. Don't let them do it wrong, girl. Her voice echoed in my head, both reminder and command. I named the new file Ledger, Chain A, Evidence. The first line I wrote was, "If they think I will stay silent, they are wrong." I saved it in the secure drive and turned off the screen. Outside the window, rain drizzled. The yellow light reflected on the desk, casting my shadow long like an endless track. Tomorrow I will act like nothing happened. But inside, I knew the wheels had already started turning. Thursday morning, I stopped by the supermarket before work. The electronics shelf sat beside the bakery counter, the smell of butter and sugar coating the cheap plastic gadgets with a fake sweetness. I picked 2 of the cheapest USB drives, $12 each. Small, dull black, perfect weapons for anyone trapped inside bureaucracy. Compact, cheap, and deadly. Out in the parking lot, I peeled off the label, heard a tiny snap, and smiled to myself. The strongest weapon in any bureaucracy is a $12 USB. When I stepped into the office, the air still carried the staleness of old coffee and the flicker of fluorescent lights. I sat down, plugged in one of the new drives, and opened an empty folder named Safety Ledger, the Book of Safety, not for display, but for remembrance. I began copying everything: alert logs, technical reports, confirmation emails, and even those resolved entries with no signatures. Each file got a timestamp, precise and patient, like I was stitching pieces of evidence with invisible thread. By noon, I went to see Sally in finance. She sat between 2 Excel screens, one for expenses, one for payments to the software vendor. The cells blinked like they were whispering secrets. "I need a few things," I said. She looked at me, then quietly closed the office door. "Let me guess. The recent process optimization expenses," I nodded. Her fingers tapped fast, like rain. She exported the data, zipped the file, and said softly, "On the system, it'll show as a backup routine. No one will notice." I smiled. "I owe you an apple pie." She didn't smile back. "You owe me a safe city. We'll settle the pie later." I slipped the first USB into my pocket, my hand trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the realization that from now on, every move could be labeled betrayal. That afternoon, I captured screenshots of internal emails. Harmless sentences that were anything but harmless, adjusted inspection targets to meet expectations, shortened confirmation timeline, streamlined approval process to meet quarterly goals. The word streamlined sounds comforting until you realize it means skipped. That night, I opened the anonymous reporting portal of the Federal Safety Commission. The interface was cold and polite, like a civil servant who didn't want involvement. I attached a few samples, scrubbed my identifiers, and wrote briefly. Alert logs are manually overwritten. Please check internal access records between 9 and 10 a.m. on the following dates. I pressed send. The screen read, "Your report has been received." No name, no case ID, no response. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder whether you were heard or swallowed. I closed the browser and pocketed the USB. One stayed in my coat, the other slid into my field log binder. Caution. That's survival in this world. The next morning, I was called into a meeting. Harold began with his usual smooth lines about teamwork, unity, and perseverance. Then came the real part. Marianne, we're temporarily reassigning you to a field coordinator role. A hands-on mission, very important. You'll serve as the bridge between engineering and operations. Bridge, bureaucratic code for demotion. I looked around the room. Some people stared at their notes. Others kept their heads down. Ryan leaned back with that half smile. I accept, I said calmly. If the field is where the right thing still matters, I'll be there. Harold nodded, relieved, like he'd just extinguished a small fire. When I walked out, my footsteps echoed on the tile floor. Each one was firm, though I no longer carried a title. And strangely, that felt lighter. Titles weigh more than people think. In the elevator, Ryan turned to me, flashing his polished grin. You should smile more. Positive people get trusted faster. I looked straight into the mirror, adjusted my hard hat. I have smiled, I said quietly. Just not at the right people. The south line greeted me with cold wind and the smell of machine oil. Old tracks, blinking signals. I stood there listening to each relay click, each metal pulse like the heartbeat of a steel creature. The young technician beside me hesitated. Ms. Holt, why do you check everything so thoroughly? Everyone else just ticks the checklist. Checklists are fine, I said, if they're written by people who want to find mistakes, not by people who want to finish. He scratched his head, embarrassed. I didn't blame him. It wasn't his fault. He just hadn't learned yet that this system values time more than lives. I noted every detail. Fresh glue on the joints, a maintenance tag with the wrong month, and bolts under-torqued. Small things, but in my world, small errors are what start the big headlines. By late afternoon, I uploaded everything to the safety ledger. I added the payment chart Sally gave me, a series of transactions for process optimization that matched perfectly with the times the logs were overwritten. The pattern was no longer suspicious. It was structured. Late at night, I sent another anonymous report, this one with photos. The same line appeared. Your report has been received. No reply, no surprise. The places built to protect truth are often the first to bury it. I turned off the lights, leaving only the desk lamp, a small ring of brightness in the dark room. My phone buzzed. A message from Sally. They added a new access check on the server. Don't log in from home. Got it. Thanks, I replied. I pulled the USB from the laptop and slid it into my coat pocket. The plastic felt cold against my skin, but inside I was calm. Not because I felt safe, because I knew the truth no longer belonged to them. Tomorrow I would still show up, smile on cue, nod at the right times. They call it cooperation. I call it evidence collection. Outside, the trains kept gliding through the city, carrying people who trusted the system to keep them safe. They didn't know that someone was saving every log, every photo, every loose bolt. No noise, no drama, just quiet, steady footsteps, and with each one, a piece of proof. Monday, 6:42 in the morning. I was pouring coffee when the phone started ringing nonstop. The night shift operator's voice was hoarse and trembling on the other end. Ms. Holt, the North Line nearly collided. Trains 407 and 409 came within 90 seconds. The signal failed to respond to the stop command. The maintenance team is working on it. The cup slipped from my hand, spilling a brown stain across the floor. 90 seconds. For trains, that isn't almost. That's not yet. I opened my laptop, but the system flashed into maintenance mode. My access had been revoked. The ones who sound the alarm are always the first to be locked out. By noon, the news broke. The broadcast called it a minor glitch in the signaling system. No casualties. On television, the spokesperson for Paragon Transit spoke in a calm monotone. This was a small technical issue, posing no risk to passenger safety. Our team is reviewing the cause. Below him, the headline scrolled, Paragon Transit, commitment to absolute safety. Commitment. A beautiful word, like glossy paint over a crack. I knew immediately. This was the very alert I had logged in the safety ledger, the one erased on the 17th of last month. I had seen this coming before it almost happened. That afternoon, an emergency meeting. The air in the conference room felt thick enough to touch. Harold sat at the head of the table, face flat and glassy. Emergency meeting, I thought, which means they need someone to blame fast. Harold said, "We need transparency. Based on preliminary data, the failure originated in coordination." "Marianne, that's your area, correct?" I answered. "Correct. And I warned about this earlier. The log from the 17th was deleted from the system." He nodded slowly, his tone cooling. "We found no record of that log. Perhaps you failed to save it properly, or," he paused, "or you acted outside protocol." The air froze. No one spoke. Ryan leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. I said, my voice calm and sharp, "You can bury paperwork, but you can't bury physics with documents." Silence. Then Harold set his pen down. "You need to step back. We'll conduct an internal review. You're suspended without pay." I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor with a dry squeal. No one looked at me. Harold lowered his gaze and Ryan pretended to write. The same people who once asked me to fix their mistakes now bowed their heads like strangers. In the hallway, Sally waited. She handed me a paper cup of coffee, still warm, and whispered, "Don't say a word. They're recording." We walked together, our footsteps echoing across the tile. Near the door, she pulled from her pocket a small blue USB drive, compact and cold as steel. "In case they wipe your files," she said. "I made a copy. Don't plug it into any company machine. Keep it safe." I gripped it tightly. "Thanks. If I don't come back—" "You will," she cut in. "Just not through the front door." We both laughed, thin, tired, but real. When I left the building, the wind swept through the station yard. The distant train horn echoed, steady and emotionless. I used to love that sound. Now it felt like a warning no one cared to hear. At home, my mother was watching the evening news. The same broadcast replayed. Minor issue, no impact on passengers. She turned to me, smiling with relief. "Thank goodness, no one got hurt, right?" I nodded. "No one got hurt, Mom. Only the truth did." Evan stepped out, backpack still on. "I heard from a friend that you got suspended." "Yeah, temporarily. Because you did something wrong." I smiled. "No, because I did something right. But sometimes doing right makes people uncomfortable." He went quiet for a moment, then said, "You should write about it. When people read it, they'll understand." I froze. Maybe he was right. If I turned the truth into a story, they would have to listen, even if they didn't want to. That night, I sat at my computer. The blue USB from Sally lay beside the keyboard, silent like a tiny witness. I opened a new file and titled it, "Because Paper Burns, but Data Doesn't." I typed the first line. "On the 17th, the signal system failed. I saw it. I saved it. They erased it. And then people almost died." Outside, the night train screamed past. It wasn't the familiar rhythm anymore. It was the heartbeat of a city that had just escaped death without realizing its luck. I looked at my mother, sleeping on the couch. Evan read quietly at the table. A small family in a large city, living on the precision of numbers others ignored. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, maybe a disciplinary form, maybe a wiped account. But it didn't matter. I had kept the data. I hadn't stayed silent, and now I wasn't alone. On the USB case, Sally had scribbled with a marker, "Safety Truth Backup." A simple name, but to me, it was a vow. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The city still glowed, the trains still ran, and people still believed the system worked the way it should. And me, even suspended, I was still the only one who knew it had betrayed its own principles. Physics doesn't lie. And when the truth is buried deep enough, it eventually claws its way back to the surface with the sound of metal scraping steel. I clenched the USB in my hand and whispered, "This isn't the end. It's the overture to a storm." Wednesday afternoon, the cold came early. I had just left the lawyer's office. He said that if I wanted to sue, I'd need something undeniable. I smiled without answering. In my mind, I saw the folders waiting quietly in the drawer, the log lines cold as buried bones. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of antiseptic filled the room. My mother, Lucille, sat on the sofa holding an old photograph, black and white, its edges burned. I recognized it, my aunt, little Lucille, the woman who pulled 3 children from a fire in 1972 and spent the rest of her life scarred. Mother looked up, her eyes clouded like fog. Little Lucille, you're home. I froze. I'm Marianne, Mom. She only smiled, her voice hazy. You're still stubborn as ever. Don't argue with fools, sweetheart. They'll win by experience. I sat beside her and held her hand. I'm not arguing, Mom. I'm just tired. She turned to me, and for a brief second, her eyes cleared. A flash of recognition. Do what's right, even when it hurts. Then she closed her eyes, her hand still clutching the scorched photo, lips moving softly in prayer. I sat there a long time. The room was filled only with the sound of the clock, each tick stabbing the silence. That night, Evan was already asleep. The apartment glowed faintly under the hallway's yellow light. I sat by the window, looking toward Lake Michigan. The water was dark, the wind sharp, city lights fractured like broken memories. I thought of my mother's words and my aunt's face, the woman who never won a medal but lived in every story of courage. She once said, saving people isn't about being strong. It's about knowing that if you don't, no one will. A train passed by, its headlights sweeping across the window before vanishing. I wondered if anyone on that train knew they had just survived because of an alert someone had tried to erase. I laughed quietly, bitter and exhausted. I had spent my life keeping the system running, and the system was ready to crush me just to keep running. The anger drained away, leaving only stillness. No fear, no rage, only clarity, cold, precise, like metal meeting water. I stood on the balcony. The wind from the lake stung my face. The lighthouse blinked steadily in the distance. I whispered into the wind, "This isn't failure. This is an opportunity." I said it again, slower, firmer. The words aligned everything. 6 years at the Bureau, 17 years in the field, 12 denied promotions, 1 suspension. None of it was a failure. Each was a moment of revelation, to see who they were and to remember who I am. Back at the desk, the screen lit my pale reflection. Files appeared one by one, fragments of a buried truth. One line stood out. Alert resolved, 17th of March. User ID, R. Mercer, Ryan Mercer, the deputy director's son. The name appeared 3 times, matching each overwritten log. I straightened up. No shock, just confirmation. They cut inspections to meet targets. They buried warnings to report early completion. They chose profit over safety. And I, the only one with proof, was silenced for knowing. I opened a new document and titled it Project Integrity. I didn't write like an engineer, I wrote like a witness. I do not write for revenge. I write to record. Because if we don't record, they will keep calling disasters minor incidents. I sent the first copy to Sally through the encrypted channel. Her reply came almost instantly. I understand. I'll help. But be careful. They're watching you. I wrote back, I know, but I'm done hiding, not when people could die from my silence. I organized everything, timestamps, signatures, every deleted log. When I finished, the clock read 3:17. The moon blurred across the window. I felt calm, the kind of calm that comes when metal aligns perfectly on the blueprint. Outside, Lake Michigan lay still. Inside, my mother slept peacefully, her face soft. Maybe she still thought I was little Lucille. Maybe, in some way, she was right. I smiled and wiped away the tears. Tomorrow I will act, no longer as someone suspended, but as the one bringing the truth to light. I heard my mother's trembling voice in my mind. Do what's right, even when it hurts. The words echoed like the sound of a night train rolling through the dark. Not advice, but a reminder that sometimes the line between cowardice and integrity isn't about shouting. It's about standing still while everyone else bows their heads. I looked out the window one last time. The lake was calm, cold, resolute, and I whispered so softly that even I barely heard it. This isn't failure. This is an opportunity. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. The Chicago sky hung heavy and gray, like damp paper ready to tear. I brewed coffee and set the cup beside my laptop. The words Project Integrity glowed on the screen, silent but weighty. Sally's first message came at 6:14. I have the software cost data and the March adjustment log. They match. I opened the file she sent. Two data sheets, technical and financial, aligned minute for minute. The signal failure hadn't been random. It had been fine-tuned, deliberately, to make the progress report look faster. I whispered as if she could hear me from the next room. We don't need to redraw the truth. We just need to expose its design. That morning, we worked in silence. Sally from finance, me from home, both refining the simulation. When I ran the model for the first time, the screen lit up in red. Signal conflict detected. I stared at it, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from proof. I saved the file and named it Model Truth V3. The name sounded cold, but to me, it was beautiful. Technical evidence, financial evidence, field photos, internal records. They fit together now, a blueprint of the truth. By afternoon, I called Sally. It's time, I said. Time for what? To send it. The first person who came to mind was Tom Reyes, the journalist who exposed the Denver signal fraud back in 2009. I remembered his article, back when people still believed engineers protected the truth. I sent him a short email, no real name, just signed MH. I have data proving Paragon Transit's signal system was altered to fake performance metrics. No accidents yet, no deaths. If we wait, there will be. 13 minutes later, he replied, I've heard this before. The last person who sent a message like that worked in Denver. She lost her job, but saved 42 lives. Send me everything. I hesitated a few seconds, then uploaded all of Project Integrity, 772 megabytes of truth. Tom called right after. His voice was rough, steady, the voice of someone who had lost more fights than he'd won. You know what you're touching, right? I know, but I can't not touch it. All right, I'll verify it. But tell me one thing. Do you want your name in this? I paused, looking out the window where the wind swayed the power lines. No need. They'll know who I am anyway. He laughed. Sounds like someone ready to be hated. No, just someone ready to be right. 2 days later, the Federal Transit Administration received an official copy of Project Integrity through Tom. The acknowledgement form had one line, case file opened, a preliminary review initiated. I read it again and again. The feeling wasn't joy or sorrow, just release. The truth had started moving, slowly but surely. Inside Paragon Transit, the storm broke fast. Harold called an emergency meeting. The room was sealed tight, but rumors moved faster than the network. We have an internal leak, he said, voice flat as a verdict. Someone sent data. Outside. We need to find them immediately. I sat in the corner, notebook open, pretending to jot things down. Ryan leaned against the wall, eyes darting, feigning calm. No one spoke, only the sound of my pen scratching paper. Harold looked at me. Marianne, have you heard anything? Has anyone in engineering seemed suspicious? I lifted my head, my face so neutral it startled even me. I just focus on my work. I'm not great at spotting traitors. Ryan scoffed. You'd better learn, Marianne. The company's on fire. I smiled faintly. I'm used to fire. I just need to know which way the wind's blowing. A few people gave awkward laughs. The meeting ended with no name to blame. That evening, Sally called. They suspect you yet? Yes, but they have no proof. They still think I'm too obedient to fight back, and they're wrong. This time, very wrong. I turned on Channel 7. At the corner of the screen, a small caption read, Federal Transit Administration confirms review of possible signal fraud in Paragon Transit System. Below it, in small print, was Tom Reyes's name, a tiny period ending a long silence. I leaned back and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I could breathe deeply. The FTA had opened a file, which meant the truth no longer belonged to me. It had its own timetable now. The next morning, Paragon's office buzzed like a hive in panic. Harold avoided my eyes. Ryan slammed a folder on the table, hissing through his teeth. Someone wants to destroy this company. Whoever it is will pay. I stood slowly, straightened my collar. The price of truth is always high, but worth it. Then I walked out. My heels echoed down the cold tile corridor. No one knew that inside my coat pocket, the USB labeled Safety Truth Backup was still there. Small, worn, but unbreakable. That afternoon, I sat in a cafe overlooking the tracks. A train passed by, wheels striking steel with a clean metallic rhythm. Everything felt slower, like the world was inhaling before the real storm. A message from Tom popped up. FTA confirmed a full investigation. They've issued a data preservation order to Paragon. Get ready. Big waves are coming. I typed back. The truth keeps its own schedule. Outside, sunset spilled over the lake, turning the windows into streaks of light, fragile but bright. I knew this wasn't over. But this time, I wasn't the silent one. The truth keeps its own schedule. I repeated it to myself and felt calm, the kind of calm only someone who has chosen the right side can truly understand. 6 months later, Chicago was still cold, but the chill no longer cut through my skin the way it used to. Maybe because I had moved to a small apartment near the harbor where the wind from Lake Michigan felt gentler, or maybe because the storm inside me had finally gone quiet. The FTA released its investigation results on Monday morning. The news spread everywhere: television, headlines, even the little cafe screen where I had my coffee every day. The Federal Transit Administration confirms that Paragon Transit's signal system was manually altered to falsify performance metrics. 2 senior executives were found directly responsible. And then came the line I had waited 6 years to hear. Chief Executive Officer Harold Tate was dismissed. Chief Engineer Ryan Mercer suspended from practice for 3 years. I stirred my coffee. The foam swirled, then faded. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the sense that everything had returned to where it belonged. At the next table, 2 people were talking. I heard someone inside leak the evidence. Probably an engineer. Brave one. I smiled. Sometimes, no one needs to know the name of the person who did the right thing. They only need to know the wrong thing has ended. That afternoon, the FTA sent me an official letter. We would like to invite Mrs. Marianne Holt to serve as an independent advisor in developing the next generation signal safety standards. I read the phrase independent advisor over and over. It sounded like another way of saying free. I accepted, not out of pride, not out of revenge, because I understood if I didn't rewrite the rules, someone else would bend them again and call it progress. 3 weeks later, I joined a team of young engineers at the FTA, people who hadn't yet learned how to be afraid. We rewrote every standard, every inspection protocol. I titled the document the Safety Ledger, the same name I'd once given the file hidden on that old USB. Then, one Friday afternoon, my phone rang. The name flashing on the screen made me laugh. Harold Tate. I almost ignored it, then picked up, not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to hear how he would try. Marianne, his voice rasped, we could renegotiate your salary. I took a sip of coffee, speaking slowly. You already did, Harold. The first time, you said I was too expensive for a 10% raise. Silence on the other end. I could almost hear him swallow. We need you, he said quietly. Please come back. The company, it's collapsing. I looked out the window. A train glided past in the sunset, the cars glowing copper in the light. They were still running, even without Paragon's oversight. That was enough. I can't come back, Harold, I said softly but firmly. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay ash. All I heard next was a long, weary breath. I hung up. No more words needed. The next day, I sent Paragon one final file, not a threat, not an apology. Inside was the complete safety manual I had written with the FTA. 215 pages, detailed, transparent, public. Not for them. For the people, the ones who boarded the trains each morning, believing someone was keeping watch. At the bottom, I signed Marianne Holt, Independent Safety Consultant. When I hit send, I closed the laptop. It felt like finishing a 6-year symphony. That evening, I took Evan for a walk along the pier. He pointed toward the lighthouse, its beam flashing in a steady rhythm. Mom, is that where you work now? I smiled. No, sweetheart. I just help it shine at the right time. He nodded, eyes bright. Like how you keep the trains from crashing. Exactly like that, I said. We sat on an old wooden bench. The waves hit the concrete in slow, steady beats. I saw my reflection on the water, clear, but never trying to stand out. That's how I wanted to live. A week later, the headlines read, Paragon Transit agrees to full restitution, cancels 2 projects, and restructures leadership. Harold vanished from the media. Ryan moved to Texas, started a small consulting firm on performance optimization. I didn't care. The truth had done its work. The FTA sent a final letter of gratitude. The safety framework developed by Mrs. Holt has been approved. Her name will be archived in the National Technical Registry. I read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. No frame, no display. A single sheet of paper can't define the worth of 6 years of persistence. On the last night of summer, I stood on the balcony watching the distant trains. No alarms, no red signals, just the quiet, steady rhythm of steel and trust. I whispered to myself, this isn't revenge. This is justice. Evan ran out, holding his phone. Mom, they wrote about you, the engineer whistleblower who saved thousands. I took the phone, glanced at the photo. It was just my silhouette, facing the lake, faceless, silent. I handed it back and smiled. Don't believe everything you read, Evan. Then who should I believe? I rested my hand on his shoulder. Believe in what's right, even when no one's watching. We sat quietly, watching the lake shift from gray to silver. The wind carried the scent of steel, salt, and time. Somewhere out there, a train horn sounded, long, deep, and safe. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay ash. But sometimes, from that ash, people learn how to build again, stronger, cleaner, aligned with the truth. 1 year later, spring returned to Chicago as if the gray days had never existed. Grass grew again along the tracks, and the rail system ran safely, right on time. Morning trains slid past like the steady breath of a city that had stopped panicking. My name no longer appeared on Paragon's employee board, but it sat instead on the Federal Transit Administration's list of independent consultants. They called me when a system needed reviewing, or when a new company wanted to do things right from the start. I accepted, working part-time. The rest of my week belonged to teaching at the University of Illinois, a small class called Ethics for Engineers in the Real World. I liked the way my students looked at me, not as a hero, but as proof that silence isn't always a virtue. My apartment was quieter now. My mother, Lucille, had passed one gentle morning, sunlight drifting through the curtains like a thin blanket. I still remember her hand on my cheek, her trembling voice mistaking me for her sister. Do what's right, even when it hurts. That line replayed in my head like an old promise that never aged. On a small wooden shelf, her photo rested beside Evan's diploma. My boy, or rather, the young man, had just earned a scholarship in engineering. He said, Mom, I'm going to design systems so no one has to risk their life to fix them. I smiled and brushed his hair. Then make sure it works right the first time. That afternoon, as I prepared my lecture, an email notification popped up. The sender, Sally B. The system finally works as it should, Marianne. No fake errors, no polished reports. Everything runs really stable, clean. I just wanted you to know. People don't laugh when they hear your name anymore. They go quiet. And sometimes, silence is the only way people admit they were wrong. I leaned back and smiled. They thought I wanted revenge, I murmured. I just wanted safety. Revenge was only the side effect. That night, I opened my laptop. The YouTube window glowed with the small channel I had started months ago, Quiet Revolutions, a place for small stories, from people who had stood up when everyone told them to sit down. I didn't have many viewers, maybe a few thousand, maybe just a few hundred, but every comment felt more valuable than any number. One said, I'm an accountant. They told me to alter reports. I refused. They transferred me, but I sleep better. Another wrote, I'm a nurse. I spoke up when a surgery went wrong, got disciplined, but the patient lived. Thank you for sharing your story. I read each one. I didn't reply to all. I just sat quietly, realizing how many people carried the same question inside them. Stay silent to keep the job, or speak up to keep themselves. I turned on the camera. The warm desk light glowed on the table, bright enough to show, not to hide. Hello, I said, voice low and steady. I'm Marianne. Maybe you know me, maybe you don't. But if you've ever worked in a place where loyalty means silence, then you know me. I paused, looking straight into the lens. Sometimes doing right doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be firm. I'm not against anyone. I just chose the side of safety. And I believe you have a story like that too. I rested my elbow on the desk. If you've ever spoken up about something someone tried to hide, share your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Because these stories, they don't belong to one person. They belong to all of us. I smiled, this time for real. And if you'd like to hear more stories of quiet revolutions, hit subscribe. It helps this channel more than you think. After I stopped recording, I sat still under the lamp, listening to the faint sound of trains in the distance. The rhythm of metal meeting metal, steady as a heartbeat, both the city's and mine. I thought of that old office chair, the one that creaked every time I tried to sit still, surrounded by the smell of burnt coffee and broken promises. Now I realize, maybe it was never broken. Maybe it was just trying to tell me, stand up. I laughed softly, because really, who among us hasn't had a chair that creaked in their life? I paused, looking at the dark screen before closing the laptop. I was simply the first to stand. Outside, the rain began to fall. Droplets hit the window, stretching the golden reflections of the streetlights. Somewhere out there, a train horn sounded, long, low, and safe. I watched as the light traced the rails toward the horizon, a line that never broke, connecting those who once stayed silent with those just learning to speak. If you're watching this from a noisy office, a late-night factory, or a small room with a creaky chair, I want you to remember this. Your value doesn't depend on whether others see you. Sometimes, just by standing up, you set the world in motion. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced what I did, share it below. Someone out there might need to hear it right now. And if you want to keep walking this journey with me, subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that somewhere out there, people are still choosing what's right. I looked at the camera one last time, my voice calm but unwavering. This isn't a story about revenge. This is a story about clarity. Because from the ruins, sometimes what rises isn't anger, it's belief. The screen faded to black. The train sounded again, long, deep, and safe. And in that moment, I knew. I had stood up. And I would never sit back down in that old chair again.